there could be a constitutional challenge to the whole piece of legislation. Under our constitution, the government brings forward legislation which it approves of, which is either voted for or against or amended by the House of Commons. What we've got now is a situation where legislation has been passed, hijacked with the connivance of a partisan school club, where opposition legislation has been passed in the face of opposition from both the executive and the government benches. How can the government be held to account at the next generation for legislation it's passed when it's not in control of the paper? That is unconstitutional. The other alternative is that the Prime Minister could write more than one letter. One letter that he's ordered to send, and then say, well, actually, this is what I really think, and this is what the government think.
Right, I mean, we don't know what sitting judges on the Supreme Court would have to say about that, because there's not a legal challenge to that. But we had one former member of the Supreme Court come on the BBC today and say that clearly wouldn't wash. I mean, it would be against the clear intent of the law. I mean, is that what it's come to, sort of hunting for loopholes?
No, I think we have to have anybody who's been searching for loopholes and breaking protocols and standing orders. It's the Remain side.
But this is the clear will of Parliament. Given that the whole Brexit process was supposed to be about giving Parliament more sovereignty, more power, I mean, now Parliament's gone against your wishes. You think it's better just to ignore Parliament?
Well, it's not just my wishes. We hear lots about the voice of Parliament. Well, Parliament decided that we were going to give the people, in a referendum, the biggest political struggle we've ever had in the history of this country, the decision of whether we're in or out of the European Union. And 3.5 years later, we haven't left. What we've actually got now is a Remain Parliament, and it's always been a Remain Parliament, fleshed out by a Prime Minister who's determined to get us out of the European Union on 31st October. I don't like it. The Liberal elite have never really lost a serious political battle in this country, and they don't like it, and they're using every means they can with the Speaker, arcane parliamentary procedures being invented, the media, to undermine that. We've actually got it's a zombie parliament now, with a zombie speaker who's announced he's resigning, full of zombie politicians who are very scared to have the day of reckoning, which is a general election, when we can all be held in the balance to democracy, and we'll have to account for the way we've voted, what we've said and what we've done since the last general election in 2017. And there are a lot of very worried politicians out there, but they do say, don't they, that when the people are scared of the politicians, that's tyranny. But when the politicians are scared of the people, that's democracy. And I think we're going to have a good dose of democracy.
The referendum called for Britain to leave the European Union. Didn't say when, didn't say on what terms. Now that Parliament has said it shouldn't happen by the 31st of October without a deal, you're saying that goes against the will of the people. But there's no evidence for that.
Theresa May's government wasted several years negotiating a withdrawal agreement that was never going to go through the House of Commons.
Well, it never went through because you voted against it 3 times. You had the chance to deliver Brexit for the British people 3 times. 3 times you voted against Theresa May's withdrawal agreement bill.
I did, because Theresa May was tasked with going out there and bringing back control of our money, our borders and our laws, and with her withdrawal agreement, which is actually a new treaty with the European Union, which would replace the rights that we've got now, probably indefinitely, and the backstop would have been the end state the EU had got in mind with us. There would be no more effective negotiations, and at least during the Article 50 process we're free to leave, whereas once we sign that withdrawal agreement and pay over huge amounts of money with no free trade agreement, it's actually at the whim of the European Union whether we could actually get out of that contract at all.
Andrew Bridgen, Member of Parliament with the governing Conservative Party, here in the BBC World Service tent with me, and indeed through this hour, Catherine Haddon, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government and Unarmed Menon, as Director of the UK in a Changing Europe. It's an independent think tank. Catherine Haddon, how quickly could this wind up in the courts if the Prime Minister decided at the European Council in the middle of October that he wasn't going to ask for an extension of the Brexit process?
It's difficult to tell. I mean, it partly depends how quickly those who want to bring him to court organise, and we know that they are already gearing up for it. And also, it's such a sort of close run thing, then you're looking at 11, 12 days until October the 31st. So everyone will want to move quickly, and I think we've got to remember that that's a long way ahead, and I think people will have a good idea by then whether or not he's likely to do so. So it could happen very rapidly. Obviously, the courts can react very rapidly, but we don't really want to end up in that situation at all. And you would expect, his own government, his Attorney General would advise him that this is not perhaps the best course of action, given all the statements they said today about the importance of the rule of law.
Well, one of the ways, Anna Menon, that we end up in that position, and it's what Prime Minister has said he wants all along, is that he manages somehow to get a deal with the rest of the European Union. There's been talk today, and it seems to have come out of his meeting with the Irish Prime Minister earlier on today, that there could be some change to the terms of this Northern Ireland backstop, this insurance policy to make sure that there isn't a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, whatever future trade deal the UK sorts out with the EU, and that there's this sort of all-Ireland backstop that would perhaps separate Northern Ireland off from the rest of the United Kingdom a little bit. What do you think the chances of that happening?
Well, first and foremost, it's worth getting it in context. We started off with a Northern Ireland-only backstop, and Theresa May asked for a UK-wide backstop because she thought it would be easier to get that through Parliament. Now, of course, we seem to be heading back towards the Northern Ireland one. That's certainly the rumour doing the rounds in Brussels, that's where the British government is headed. And the simple answer, I think, is we don't know what happens to that in Parliament. We're not entirely sure how many of the Prime Minister's own party would rebel, how many members of the European Research Group would take offence at this notion.
There's a hardline Brexit.
The Democratic Unionist Party obviously would vote against this.
The Northern Ireland Party, yeah.
And the question then is how many of the Labour opposition party would be willing to vote with him. The other calculation, I think, for the Prime Minister, because all of this, remember, is happening in the shadow of a general election we all know is coming, is to what extent, if the Prime Minister, as seems to be the case, is determined to try and snuff out the Brexit party by proving his Brexit credentials, offering what looks to people like Nigel Farage like a softer sort of Brexit, a withdrawal agreement with Northern Ireland having special status, that could throw his election plans into chaos as well. So he's got to fight for all those things at the same time.
Thank you, and we'll certainly be coming back to what everybody seems to be agreed as one of the few things they can agree on, and that is the fact that we are going to have a general election sooner rather than later. More on that in 15 minutes here on NewsHour.
This is Paul Henley, and here on NewsHour I'll be handing back to Tim Franks outside Parliament in a little while. He'll be taking in the last events before the chamber is closed down until the middle of next month, and among other things assessing how receptive the EU might be to a request from the UK for a further delay to Brexit.
President Macron has been clear. We would accept no more delays, and the 31st of October is the finish line.
And in a moment, I'll be looking at some of today's other news, including an announcement by North Korea that it's willing to restart negotiations with the US. But do the two sides still have very different ideas of what constitutes denuclearization? And we hear from the Bahamas, where some of those on the islands worst affected by the storm of more than a week ago say they're still not getting the basic help they need. This is NewsHour, live from the BBC. 8 days have passed now since Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas, and hundreds of people there are still missing. The country's health minister has rejected claims by some residents that there's been little sign of an official response to the disaster. Our correspondent Aleem Makboul has been to Abaco, one of the worst affected areas.
Now the airport on Abaco has been cleared of debris. It's a chaotic scene of people trying to get off the island that was so devastated by Hurricane Dorian. People like Petra Russell.
There's not enough. There's nothing to do, so all you can do is try better, because everything is gone.
Drive through the town of Marsh Harbour close by, and there's not a structure standing as far as the eye can see, particularly in the Haitian shanty town there.
When this hurricane passed, some people, they don't have time to move.
And there was the home of Ebna Francois,
We were going to accompany him back to the spot for the first time. But when he got to the edge of the town,
He froze.
why don't you want to go there?
You could smell, you don't know what you smell there. Look like some people is still in there. Now plenty people dead. Plenty people dead.
Among the ghosts here for Ebner is that of his girlfriend, Lisa. Her body was found, but the stench Ebner talks of suggests many still haven't been.
I got 3 of them guys. And they're still in there.
They didn't find the bodies?
No.
Ivana survived with her children, though she lost 2 fingers in the storm, stopping a door hitting her daughter. But 3 of her cousins are still missing. She's reluctant to fly out to the Bahamian capital, Nassau.
They tell people go Nassau. I don't know nothing about Nassau because I ain't got no family in Nassau to live because my kids need to go to school. But I ain't got nothing. I ain't got nothing in my life.
It is the poorest who've been affected most by the hurricane, mainly from Abaco's Haitian community. Many of them feel the prospects are bleak, whether they stay or go.
Alim Makboul reporting. Well, we can explore further signs now that the emergency response has been lacking on the worst affected islands in the Bahamas, because I've been speaking to Janelle Eli, who's spokeswoman for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and who was in the Abaco Islands as recently as yesterday. I asked her what her impression had been.
When I went to a mass shelter yesterday, which is on Abaco, it's one of the most devastated areas, it was a shocking scene. There were entire neighborhoods flattened. There were roofs twisted by the wind. I've never seen anything like it. And even parks that weren't supposed to be next to houses just because of the storm surge. But there is also action going on in that area. There is healthcare available in a clinic. Clean water is coming in, and there's aid being delivered at first. At the same time, there were lines of people trying to evacuate the islands the other day, and now those lines have really died down because thousands have left the island. There are still people affected on the islands and the Keys, and they have a lot of urgent needs. That's things like emergency shelter materials, more clean water and sanitation, and really just some sense of normalcy. Even if people's houses survived, their entire town is gone. The schools are no longer there or are no longer functional. I was at a school yesterday that was serving as an evacuation center, and there were people there who still hadn't been able to get in touch with their loved ones, both on the island and off the island. So we actually were able to offer satellite phones to people so they could try to contact their friends and family in places like Haiti or other islands. But there's still a lot of uncertainty. One of them couldn't get in touch still with their family members. So I think that uncertainty is really presenting a lot, of course, of stress on people above even just the physical needs that they have.
And what do you think their most desperate needs are right now?
Right now, for people staying on the island of Abaco, their emergency shelter is a huge need. Things like tarps, hammers, nails, anything that they can use to just repair a bit of their houses. Water and sanitation, it is coming in, but it's presenting an urgent need because disease is a mounting threat. If water and sanitation isn't addressed in places after disaster, we really see secondary humanitarian needs. At the same time, people are really trying to figure out what their next steps are. People lost their fishing boats, the stocks in their stores, any way they had of earning income. And so that's really adding to the uncertainty as well in this effort.
You're back in the capital, Nassau, now, I understand. What's the situation like there? Because there must be a lot of people coming in emergency situations from elsewhere in the Bahamas. Can the city accommodate them?
So right now, a lot of people in Nassau are either staying with friends and family members or at government-run shelters. I've heard a lot about the generosity of sisters and brothers and grandparents who are hosting people, but that certainly adds a level of stress to families. And one big need that we've seen a lot here in Nassau is what I mentioned earlier, which is reconnecting families. People are very anxious to hear about what is happening with their families and whether people are alive. So even if people haven't physically lost anything, the sense of normalcy is really gone.
Janelle Eli, spokeswoman for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in the Bahamas. North Korea is willing to restart talks with the US this month on denuclearization. The announcement from the North Korean foreign minister comes 24 hours after the US Secretary of State said he hoped for a resumption. I asked the BBC's Seoul correspondent, Laura Bicker, what exactly the North Koreans were offering.
What Pyongyang seems to be saying is we will meet at a time and place that we can both agree upon in late September. Now, today is a special day in North Korea. It's National Foundation Day. We had been expecting some kind of signal to the United States. And there have been the kind of rumours that something was going to kind of come out of North Korea. And here we are with them offering to hold talks. Now, this is not an offer of Kim Jong-un sitting down with Donald Trump. We believe that this is an offer of working level talks. So perhaps Mike Pompeo with the Vice Foreign Minister, Choi Soon-hui, who made the statement today, or whoever North Korea decides to send. Also, this kind of offer comes with a bit of a warning. Pyongyang is saying that it will not accept any of the scenarios that the United States has put down in front of them in previous summits. So that means that the kind of deal that the US offered in Hanoi in February, the reason that talks have stalled this entire year, that deal is off the table.
But despite all the friendly noises, what the US wants is very simple. It's denuclearization. Do you think that we're any closer to that with this announcement?
North Korea does not want to give up all its weapons up front without getting major sanctions relief. And in fact, many believe that North Korea doesn't want to give up all its weapons full stop. And the United States has said, look, there's going to be no sanctions relief until you are prepared to give away all of your nuclear weapons. So if they come to the table with that current standpoint, which has not changed, then it does seem that these talks are likely to fail. It will all boil down to whether or not the United States is willing to kind of ease up its definition of denuclearization. But it doesn't come down so hard on it, having in every interview made it clear that's exactly what they're looking for. It's a difficult position to come away from.
The BBC's Seoul correspondent there, Laura Bicker. President Trump has been talking to reporters about his decision to call off peace negotiations with the Taliban that were supposed to end America's 18-year war in Afghanistan. He said over the weekend that he'd cancelled a meeting at his Camp David retreat after the militants admitted they were behind a recent attack that killed a US soldier. This is what the president said an hour ago.
They're dead. They're dead. As far as I'm concerned, they're dead. They thought that they had to kill people in order to put themselves in a little better negotiating position. When they did that, they killed 12 people. One happened to be a great American soldier. And you can't do that. You can't do that with me. So they're dead as far as I'm concerned.
That was President Trump. This is NewsHour from the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service. Our Media Front looks at the issues facing journalists and the media around the world. In the third of our new series, we explore press freedom in Ukraine, a country embroiled in civil war since 2014.
What is the balance between freedom and security? And there's a real debate between the people who say that freedom of speech is sacrosanct at all times and the people who say no, because we're at war, something changes.
We hear from journalists caught up in an information war.
We have problems with Russian propaganda, which is targeting Ukraine, and we also have problem with the government propaganda, which often distorts the information which people receive here in Kiev.
This kind of flood of misinformation and toxic content. People aren't stupid, they just become suspicious of anything.
To be a patriot, if you're a journalist, means to tell the truth.
Media Front, Wednesday at 12:30 and 21 GMT.
Coming up on NewsHour in the next 30 minutes, what a series of US investigations into anti-competitive practices could mean for the global tech giants, how the resignation of the Speaker of the UK House of Commons dominated proceedings on the last day of debate for more than a month, and a French view on the practicalities of extending Britain's Brexit deadline. All after the news.
BBC News with Jonathan Izard. British MPs have inflicted another defeat on the government in the first of two emergency Brexit debates they're squeezing in before Parliament is suspended for 5 weeks. They've demanded to read an impact assessment of a no-deal Brexit and documents that shed light on when and why the government decided to put Parliament on a break. North Korea has announced its willingness to resume nuclear talks with the United States, which have been stalled for more than 6 months. The Vice Foreign Minister said they could begin later in September, but warned that Washington would have to provide new proposals. Legal officers from across the United States have announced a collective investigation into allegedly anti-competitive practices by Google. The declaration on behalf of 50 attorneys general said the aim was to protect the free market and consumers. The Nigerian and South African authorities have agreed to work together to stop the recent wave of violence in Pretoria and Johannesburg that's killed 12 people, including at least 2 foreign nationals. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned the violence and called on police to stand firm. The former South Sudanese rebel leader Riek Machar and President Salva Kiir have held their first face-to-face talks in months in an effort to push forward the stalled peace process. The two former rivals signed a deal a year ago to end a civil war. The UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet has criticized the Venezuelan government for failing to stop extrajudicial executions. She said that most of the violence is being carried out by a special police unit. And the US adventurer Victor Vescovo has become the first person to visit the deepest points in every ocean. His 5th and final descent was made to the bottom of the Malloy Trench in the Arctic, some 5.5 kilometers below the sea surface. His expedition team says it's discovered nearly 40 new species in the process. Scientists say Mr. Vescovo's achievement will help researchers better understand ocean circulation, which is needed to improve the computer models that project future climate scenarios. BBC News.
Coming up next, we return to College Green outside the British Parliament. But first, legal officers from across the United States have announced a collective investigation into allegedly anti-competitive practices by Google. The declaration on behalf of 50 attorneys general was made on the steps of the Supreme Court in Washington in the past few hours. They said the aim was to protect the free market, competition, and consumers in the face of what they described as the online search engine juggernaut. The Attorney General of Nebraska, Doug Peterson, spoke at the launch.
When 50 Attorney Generals come together, 50 Attorney Generals send a strong message to Google. It really is significant. The fact that you have the UK, France, Australia, the European Commission looking at this all indicate that this is a significant issue. And we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, let's talk to Eric Goldman, who's Professor of Law at Santa Clara University School of Law in California, co-director of the High-Tech Law Institute. Welcome to the program, Professor. Nearly all the state attorney generals in the US are behind this antitrust